Hello, wonderful podcast listeners. This is Cindy. Allison and I revealed really big news on our recent live episode. We now have a website dedicated to this podcast. Go to howpreschoolteachersdoit.com to read stuff we've written, to check out the latest news, see the topics for upcoming episodes, and to contact us. We'd love to hear from you. Welcome to How Preschool Teachers Do It.
This is Allison Kentos. I am an early childhood educator.
And this is Cindy Tarabush. I am an early childhood consultant.
This podcast is for parents and early childhood professionals.
Let our experience and research-based knowledge become your guide. Hi, Allison and I are glad that you joined us for this episode of the podcast. Today we're going to talk about an area of learning that the children in the preschool years do the most learning about. Their brains are wide open to learning about language. And as part of that, they are at this magical moment where we can do a lot to teach them vocabulary.
Yeah.
Which I'm sure is something you do in your classroom a lot, Allison. And so what we wanted to do with this episode was to give you a little bit of information about vocabulary and children's learning of vocabulary, but also to make sure that there are some things that have been done over the years for reasons that, frankly, Alice and I don't know why, but that really don't need to be done with young children. You know, there's no word that's too hard for them to learn because they're learning all the words.
Correct.
And the research shows that building a better vocabulary when they're very young actually raises their reading success rates later on.
Yeah. I use really big words with them. Well, first I talk to them like they are my friends, like like people, you know, not like, you know, I talk very conversation-like with them. And if there's a word that's big that I use it with them. I don't stop myself and say, oh, wait, I can't use that word because they're too little. They're not going to understand it. I use pretty big words with them. I've used words even like evaporation and condensation and all sorts of things like that. Metamorphosis.
Hypothesis.
Yeah.
And I'll teach them a hypothesis is a guess. So you use it.
Right.
You use it like you constantly interweave the words and the definition. Like I'll say to children, a hypothesis is a guess. What's your guess or your hypothesis? What's your hypothesis?
Right.
What's your guess? You know, like sort of talk about it interwoven that way throughout the day.
Right. Like when we do our butterfly unit, I buy them caterpillars and I watch them turn into the whole, like the chrysalis and the whole thing. I talk about how like this is a big metamorphosis. You know, the whole process is, you know, and then they're like, oh, what is that? It's a, you know, and then I'm like, that means, you know, changes through time. So they're like, oh, okay. And then sometimes they use it in ways that are not necessarily the right definition, but I'm just glad that they're trying to use it, you know? So, like, or if there is a puddle outside and it's there, and then the next day it's not there, sometimes they notice. And I'm like, oh, it evaporated. Right. Evaporated is when it turns from water to gas, and that goes up into the clouds, and then the cycle starts all over again.
It goes into the air, and we can't see it anymore, and then it will go and make clouds, and it'll rain, and we'll see it again. We can explain these things to young children. I think it's important, though, that we continually do it, and we have to remember that expanding a child's vocabulary isn't a one-day or one-shot deal. That whatever new words we introduce to them, we need to use those words all the time and in different contexts.
Yeah. I use these words like in just normal conversation. Like even if it's like a word like cooperation, that's a big word. Mm-hmm. You know, they don't necessarily know what that word means, but I'm going to use it throughout the course of the day. Like we need to cooperate with each other, cooperate as a team, you know.
And we need to work together. We need to cooperate.
To work together. Yeah. And then they start getting like, oh, that's what that word means. It's a big word, but I know what it means, you know? And it's just like it's almost like a higher level of thinking, but it's not because they're just so ready to absorb all of that. You know?
The windows of the brain for language are wide open.
Wide open, yeah.
So they can begin to integrate a lot of new words. I think in addition to words, we want to just use real phrasing with children too, a little more sophisticated phrasing. We don't have to talk down to them. I often tell people when I'm speaking at conferences that one of the things I don't say to children is walking feet. That's not a phrase they're going to encounter anywhere else when someone needs them to walk instead of run. And I
Right.
use the real phrasing. I look at them and I say, "Walk in the hallway, please."
Yeah. Yeah.
Like they need to hear the real phrasing. No one says walking feet in the outside world.
Yeah.
Like I used this example at a conference recently, and people were laughing so hard and realizing what they were saying. I said to them, when you're running to catch a train in the subway in New York City, for example, and you've bumped into somebody, nobody turns to you and says, "Walking feet."
Yeah.
Like
Nobody says that. Nobody says that. Or inside voices. Use your
that's
inside
another
voice.
one. That's another
Which
one.
to
That
me
is
is
their inside voice, folks. That
yeah,
loud
that
voice is their inside voice.
yeah. Yeah. It's not teaching them anything. It's just teaching them like, okay, well, this is how I talk inside, and I talk inside loud. You know
Right,
what I
like
mean?
it's
So,
not
and
teaching
it's
them
just
anything.
like,
So,
yeah, usually I'm
no,
like,
I need to
you
teach
need
them
to
a
use a
word.
yeah, I usually say you need to use a quieter voice.
Quiet.
You
I
need
use
to
the
be
word quiet
quiet,
because
you know.
when I'm working in an adult environment with all adults, imagine big giant office, people at cubbies, everybody's on the phone. It gets kind of loud in there. I don't think anyone walks around saying indoor voices.
Yeah, I know.
Like I think they just say it needs to be quieter in here.
Yeah.
So we need to use the phrasing that they're going to hear in the real world. I'm not sure where we ever got this whole walking feet thing or indoor
Well,
voices.
I think that was born when people started to realize they shouldn't say do not, do not, do not. So they're like, instead of saying do not run, they're just like, oh, let's just make it a cutesy phrase. It's like,
It doesn't need to be cutesy,
but I feel like
nor does
that's
my
just
vocabulary have to be at the level of the
right,
2-year-olds. I'm supposed to be lifting them up. It's one of the
right,
problems I have with some of the puppet or cartoon characters that they see on TV who speak at their level.
right.
They shouldn't be
But
speaking at their level. They should be speaking at a slightly higher level to lift them up.
right. I talk to the children like I'm talking to another adult in the room, to be quite honest. Like I have a conversation like I'm having a conversation right
I
now,
don't know,
and
Allison. I
that's
mean, I
just
feel
how I
like you
talk.
can be sarcastic. I don't when you're
I
talking.
try, I am a little sarcastic in real life. I try to not be like that. But sometimes that'll come out
All right, I'm
and the
just going to
kids
point
will
out that
laugh.
maybe you don't exactly speak to children.
Maybe not exactly true. I'm not like when I talk to Cindy on the phone or something. But I also don't dumb down my language for them.
No, I
You
don't
know,
dumb
like I
down my
definitely don't
language
do
either.
that. Yeah, I don't dumb it down. Like these are the words that are in my vocabulary and I'm going to continue to use them, you know?
Yes.
And if I'm not going to talk like wee 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 to them either. You know,
Absolutely
so
not.
like because that's not how the real world talks. You know, the real world talks like this, you know, and then that models the whole conversation and talking and language to them. Like, why are we trying to use words that don't even exist in language for them? You know,
I
like
don't know.
like
I,
people who call bottles baba. Do you want your baba? No. Do you want a bottle? Do
yeah.
you want a cup? Do you, because people, even with kids that are in my class now, they're 3, they're still calling a cup a baba. And I'm like, no, 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 no. It's a cup. Do you want a
At
cup
3
of
years
milk?
old, it's a cup.
It's a cup. Do you want a cup?
Hmm.
You know, like, and so like a simple word like that, you don't need to use those words are not real words. Baba is not a real word.
Are you sure?
You know, I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I don't
Or
remember. I don't remember when my kids were little. I'm thinking back now. I did not say Baba, but we did have funny little nicknames for the pacifier. I remember.
yeah. I feel like a lot of people have that because they're called so many different things. I usually call it a binky, and
Isn't
I know
that a
that's not.
brand name?
I don't
Are we
know.
like? I think that's a brand name.
Oh, is it? See, I
I
don't know. I
think so.
just
I think it's kind of like Kleenex. People will call tissues Kleenex, but Kleenex is a brand name. I think that's where
I'm
Binky
usually
came into our language from. I think it was a brand of pacifier.
I'm usually so good about not using brand names for
Yeah, me
certain
too. But
like I
I
don't
do
use
think they
Kleenex
sneak
for
into our language.
yeah, because I
Um,
didn't even know that was a brand.
yeah, I think it
Yeah.
was. But
Oh,
you know what?
wow.
So is Escalator.
Yeah, so is Band-Aid.
Right. I
Yeah.
mean, they just sneak into our language.
Escalator's a brand?
Yes. They're
Wow.
movable stairs.
Wow. See, I didn't know that either.
And I think that word started out as a brand also. And if anyone's listening to this and knows that I'm wrong, feel free to email
Yeah,
us and
please
tell
tell
us
us.
we are
Things like this fascinate
crazy.
me.
Feel
Yeah.
free. These are like, I'm here to talk about little kids. I'm not necessarily a movable stairs expert. So I think,
Oh,
but I think that, young children, we definitely want to use words and definitions, not only in our conversations, but also when we read to them. when we read books to them, we need to give intentional thought to the words and phrases in the books that they may not know what they mean, and define it for them as we read.
Right. Well, that's what I find reading books is so great because even like the picture books that you're reading to them, they sometimes have some really big words in there that
They
they don't know.
do, but
And
sometimes the
it's
words
amazing.
are like everyday words for you and me, but they're not everyday words for the children. Like,
Right.
I'm trying to think of a good one. Like, I was reading a book in a classroom recently, and the kids didn't know what something was, and I was like, wow, I didn't realize they wouldn't know what that was. And I can't think of it right now. Um,
I know sometimes when I read what's that book?
you know what? Yeah.
Knuckle Bunny, and there's that part where the little girl goes boneless,
Oh,
and um, like we know what that means. It's funny to us, you know, like oh she went boneless, but the kids don't know what that means.
right. You have to
I'm like oh
explain it
that
to
just
them.
means she kind of,
She
you know,
flopped.
she flopped on the floor
Yeah.
because she was so upset. Yeah, and then they're like oh okay boneless, yeah, you know,
So in the
so
book,
then they kind of get it, yeah.
A Chair for My Mother,
Oh yeah.
there's the phrase "take a load off my feet."
Oh yeah, they don't know
And
what
kids
that
don't know
means.
what that means unless we help them to understand that it means to sit down and rest.
Yeah. There were some of those phrases like that I didn't even understand when I was like older. Like in elementary school, I remember one of my teachers, I think I was in third grade, she goes, oh, let's get the show on the road. And I'm like, I don't know what that means. This isn't a show.
Right.
And I was, in third grade, so like, I mean, they don't know what that means. And that's
Definitely
okay.
think about the books you're reading to kids. And again, if
Yeah.
there's a word that you come across where you think the child might not know what this word means, please define it in the course of your reading
Right.
in a simple way, a way that
Yeah.
they can relate to. We need to be linking vocabulary to their real lives and their
Yeah.
interests and their experiences, and we can do that no matter really what vocabulary we want to use,
Yeah.
I think.
Well, I think you can link anything to their real life experiences, Like that's what I feel like everything is like a big discovery. Like I always try to make everything a discovery. So like if you're learning about I don't know, if you are learning about the water cycle and like, rain, if you're learning about rain because it's almost, if it's a rainy time of season, why not use those big words? Because now's the time to get them. They're
Right.
interested in it. So now's the time to put them in their vocabulary because
But it
they'll
doesn't even need
they'll
to be
absorb it.
like the word hypothesis, a lot of people think of as just a science word, but no, you can guess at
No, it's not.
anything.
You can guess at anything. Yeah, yeah,
You can develop a hypothesis and then test it about anything.
yeah, yeah. Or like, what's another one I use? Oh, like, let's estimate. Let's estimate how long, it's going to take to do this. Let's estimate how many steps it is from the playground to the whatever. And they're like,
Right.
estimate? I'm like, that's just like a guess, a mathematical guess. How much do you estimate? A roundabout,
About,
like,
right? It's about like
about, yeah.
how many do you think?
How many do you think?
How many do you
You
think?
know?
And I like to use the word, there was another word I just thought of as you were talking about that. And now, of course, it has left my brain. Oh, predict. I'll
Oh,
tell
yeah,
children we're going to predict what will happen, which means we're going to try and guess what's going to happen, right? And I'll
yeah.
use predict throughout the whole day. Let's predict, or evidence. I use the word evidence a lot. I was in a
Yeah.
school where they did the whole leprechaun walk
Oh,
through
the
the school
trap.
before the tracks before
Yeah.
St. Patrick's Day, and there were like these green tracks and glitter throughout the school. And a few of the kids said to me, the leprechaun was here. And I said, the leprechaun was here. What's your evidence? How do you know?
How do you know?
And
Yeah.
that was how I just did it like in the course of conversation. Like, what's your evidence? How do you know?
Yeah.
And they said, oh, the tracks are there and the glitter is there. And I said, wow, that's pretty good evidence.
Evidence. Yeah.
And I used it again
I
to
use predict
redefine.
all the time.
Predict all the time. Yep. And
Like
hypothesize.
even if I'm reading a book, I'm like, what do you predict is going to happen?
What do you think
When
will
we tur-
happen? What do you
yeah, when we
predict?
turn the next page, what do you think is going to be on that page? What do you think
Hmm.
is going to happen? What's your prediction?
Right.
And like I use that all the time. Like, what do you predict? What do you think? Like, and I think that's easy to do to just slip those words in and then just explain it in a very easy way. What do you predict? What do you think? What's
Right.
your guess?
Right.
Like,
What do you think is going to happen? Look what
what do
she
you think's
did. Now,
going to
what do you
happen?
think is going to happen?
Yeah, what makes you think that?
Right.
You
I think
know?
what makes you think that is a really good open ended question.
Yeah,
And it
yeah.
teaches them that a prediction is usually based on evidence.
Yeah, yeah.
I've also used the word foreshadowing with kids.
Oh,
We'll
yeah,
say
that's
to
a
them,
good.
let's foreshadow, let's give a hint about what's going to
Yeah,
happen.
Yeah, that's a good one.
right? You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you. No, I use that one with kids, and I'm going to now.
Or sometimes kids will say, "Oh, if she walks over there, she's going to step in the giant puddle." And I'll say to them, "That's really cool foreshadowing.
Yeah.
There's a puddle over there and you see her walking that way. You
Yeah.
foreshadowed. You
Yeah.
said what you really think is going to happen, and it is."
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we have to, believe it or not, it's sum up time again.
Oh wow, this is a
Wow.
fun
Okay.
book.
So um, remember, there aren't any words that are too hard for your child to learn if we define them in a way that they can relate to. Please avoid phrases that seem to have been made up only for early childhood because they will never encounter them anywhere else. And we
Yeah.
want them to be using real language.
Yeah.
And remember that once we introduce new words and phrases, we should be using it often and constantly intertwining what the word means with the use of it.
Yeah.
And together we can lift the vocabulary of this generation if we expose them to language and words that are slightly higher than what they already know. For more information about this, you can reach us, Cindy, CINDY, at helpingkidsachieve.com. Allison?
AllisonJoy79@gmail.com.
And, feel free to subscribe and rate and comment on the podcast. We would love 5 stars from you. Well, we will connect with you again in the next episode in a couple weeks. Bye.